Well, good morning, and happy Father's Day to all the fathers. We thank God for all our fathers here. So, thank you. Today we're going to be continuing our series on some obscure, difficult passages in the book of Numbers. Yeah. And today, I heard a deep sigh. Oh dear. Okay, I don't know how I feel about that one. All right. Today we're going to be looking at what appears to be possibly one of the bigger overreactions that I have read. If you have a Bible, please turn to Numbers chapter 15, verse 32. Numbers chapter 15, verse 32. If you remember from previous weeks, the first 10 chapters of the book of Numbers, it essentially shows the people of Israel preparing to enter the promised land. And during this time, they're shown as being generally quite obedient. They are zealous for pursuing holiness. They are obeying God's commandments to a T. They have a heart of commitment to God. And no matter the cost, they are willing to do what God commands them to do. Well, all that attitude of obedience and faithfulness just gets tossed out the window, starting in chapter 11. In fact, from chapter 11 through chapter 25, we are instead given several stories of Israel's abject wickedness and disregard for God's commandments. We get stories like Korah's rebellion. We get stories about Israel's rebellion. We get stories about Israel refusing to enter the promised land when they were supposed to, what they've been preparing for. We see things like the sin of Baal Peor and all sorts of wickedness, all matter of wickedness that starts to define the Israelites' lives at this time. We also get a story that doesn't seem to be on quite the same level here in chapter 15 of Numbers. I mean, on the one hand, you get, the sin of Baal Peor, right? Where Israel is engaged in debaucherous idolatry. If you don't know what I'm talking about, you just need to read it. You get something like that. But then you get a story like this, about a man picking up sticks on the Sabbath day. I'm reading from chapter 15, verse 32, and I'm reading from the ESV here. While the people of Israel were in the wilderness, they found a man gathering sticks on the Sabbath day. And those who found him gathering sticks brought him to Moses and Aaron and all the congregation. They put him in custody because it had not made clear what should be done to him. And the Lord said to Moses, "The man shall be put to death. All the congregation shall stone him with stones outside the camp." And all the congregation brought him outside the camp and stoned him to death with stones, as the Lord commanded Moses. You see what I'm talking about, right? I mean, of all the sins done in Numbers, this is the least sin of them all, you'd think. The guy was just gathering. It's hard to see actually what was wrong with this guy's actions here. If I found a person gathering sticks, I wouldn't even give a second thought about it. I most certainly wouldn't throw him in prison, and most certainly I would not put him to death. And yet that is exactly what God commands here. How do we make sense of that? I guess the first thing to consider is, what is the Sabbath day? The man is picking up sticks on the Sabbath day, so it might be important to know exactly what this Sabbath day is. And if you don't know what the Sabbath day is, it was a special day established by God, that God commanded to be observed by the nation of Israel in the Old Covenant. That is, the Sabbath day was the seventh day of the week. It was the equivalent of our Saturdays. On it, absolutely no work was to be done. It was set aside by God as a day of rest for the people. The command is given to us in Exodus chapter 20, verses 8 through 11, which reads this: "Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, you or your son or your daughter or your male servant or your female servant or your livestock or the sojourner who is within your gates. For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, the sea, and all that is in them, and rested on the seventh day. Therefore, the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy." On the Sabbath day, nobody was supposed to be doing any work. Nobody. Not even servants, not even travelers, not even animals. Nobody was supposed to work because God had chosen to rest from his work in creation. Now, God didn't rest because he was tired. No, he stopped his work because his work was done and complete. In the same way, the Israelites were supposed to consider their week's work done and complete, with nothing else left to do. They were supposed to rest. They were supposed to rest in a way that they were not permitted to rest while they were slaves in Egypt. No, God intended his people to work hard throughout the week, and he reserved the last day for them to rest and to enjoy the fruits of their labor. But this was a difficult practice. This was a difficult practice because to rest meant that you had to trust God. You had to trust that God would provide. Because, you could have made a little bit more money on the Sabbath day if you worked. You could have made a little bit more money. But instead, you must choose to trust that God's going to provide, that God will take care of you. And you must also choose not to be an evil taskmaster, forcing your servants, forcing your animals to work. No, you must let them rest, and you must trust. You must trust that God is going to provide. And that kind of faith, that kind of trust is not an easy thing. So already we see it's not an easy thing to practice the Sabbath day. And yet, it was important. Because ever since we as humans have sinned, our work has been defined by toil and sweat and futility. Just like how the Israelites' lives in Egypt were defined by toil and sweat and futility. But God is at work bringing the Israelites out of their slavery in Egypt, out of the bondage that they were in, and bringing them into this new Garden of Eden, this promised land where he's going to dwell with them again. And he wants that land to be defined by rest. God gave the Sabbath command so that they might rest and enjoy the fruits of their labors, just like God did in Eden, just like all humanity was supposed to do in the Garden of Eden. And he made it so that even servants and animals might rest. The command to rest is not an insignificant thing if you've been working hard all week. No, he commanded that all people, servants and animals, had to rest. This command made Israel absolutely and utterly unique from the nations around them. No other nation was practicing such a Sabbath, a weekly Sabbath. It was supposed to show to the world God's intention to undo the curse of the fall, his intention to restore this world to the rest that defined creation at the end of his work of creating. It was vitally important to the Old Covenant, so much so that if a person chooses to violate it, they were choosing to forsake the covenant that God had made with their nation. And that brings us back to Numbers chapter 15. What is this guy doing picking up sticks on the Sabbath day? Interestingly, the author doesn't actually tell us the man's motives here. We're kind of left in the dark here as readers, but we're not left without clues. Immediately before the story, if you look a little bit earlier, we have some laws that deal with people who violate commandments given by God. If you look at verse 27, we read this. If one person sins unintentionally, he shall offer a female goat a year old for a sin offering, and the priest shall make atonement before the Lord for the person who makes a mistake, when he sins unintentionally, to make atonement for him, and he shall be forgiven. You shall have one law for him who does anything unintentionally, for him who is native among the people of Israel, and for the stranger who sojourns among them. In the Old Testament, there were a lot of laws. There were a whole bunch of laws that the Israelites had to keep. But these laws were not burdens. It wasn't a burden. Joyfully, these laws showed the people of Israel what God required of them if he was going to dwell with them physically. But it was not meant to be a burden. And because it was not meant to be a burden, if an Israelite accidentally violated one of the cultic laws, one of the rituals that they were supposed to follow, there is provision made for them. Here these laws talk about you can make a sacrifice to rectify the situation. If a person unintentionally violates the law, accommodation is made for them. Unfortunately, not all sins are committed unintentionally. No, some sins are done willfully, which verse 30 makes clear. But the person who does anything with a high hand, whether he is native or a sojourner, reviles the Lord, and that person shall be cut off from among his people, because he has despised the word of the Lord and has broken his commandment. That person shall be utterly cut off. His iniquity shall be on him. Sins that are done unintentionally are one thing, but intentionally violating the commands of God is another thing entirely. To have a full knowledge of God's law, and yet with premeditation, without any coercion, to willingly disregard and violate that law, that sin could not be tolerated in the nation of Israel. Such a person choosing to do so reveals something about their heart. It reveals that they have no desire to remain in covenant with God. No, in fact, they want to be their own God. And immediately after giving this law, we're given this story about a man picking up sticks on the Sabbath. The story doesn't give us insight into the man's motives, but the placement of this story here, it's telling us something. It's telling us that this story is it is serving as an example of a high-handed sin that must be dealt with in the nation of Israel. Apparently, this man is actively and willingly choosing to disregard the command of God. The picking up of the sticks here is not the issue. No, it's the fact that this is a high-handed sin that makes this man receive the death penalty. The man isn't picking up sticks to help build a treehouse with his kids. He's not picking up sticks, gathering sticks to help his neighbor clean off his lawn. No. This man is gathering sticks to send a message. I get to decide when to rest, not you, God. I am the Lord of my life, God, not you. God, he did not forbid people from doing things on the Sabbath. Lots of things could be done on the Sabbath. It was supposed to be a day of rest and of enjoyment. What was forbidden was doing this kind of economic, laborious work, but I mean, look at what happened with Jesus and his disciples, right? His disciples were walking along the field, they grabbed some grain and they were grinding it in their hands. They were not violating the Sabbath by doing so. They were enjoying the fruit of their labor throughout the week, of the nation of Israel's labor throughout the week. They were enjoying life. They were not working. They were not violating the Sabbath. People could do good on the Sabbath. Even if a donkey falls into a pit, you can help bring that donkey out. You can do work on the Sabbath. It's not meant to be a burden. Doing good is not defined by toil and sweat and futility that is due to this cursed world. No, in fact, the very opposite. Doing good is the absolute opposite of doing that. Jesus recognized that the Sabbath was not meant to be a burden. The Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. But the Sabbath command was serious. It was serious. It did forbid people from doing economic, laborious work. If he was just gathering sticks to play a game with his kids, that's a whole nother thing. But clearly it was determined that this man was picking up sticks for toil, sweat, and futility reasons in a high-handed disregard of God's commandments. And because of this, the man died. Because if this man and his actions were to be left unchecked, then there would be no end to labor in the land of Israel. There would be no rest in the land of Canaan. Because we as people, we have a really good knack of getting around the rules to suit our own agendas. You know, it's like, I'm not really violating the law here, but you are, right? You're trying to just accommodate it to your own agenda there. God being extreme here in his example to this man ensured that the whole nation would get rest. That's what he was after in the first place, in the nation of Israel, so that he could give the people the rest that they were supposed to have in the Garden of Eden. That's why it's so serious to violate it. God's response had to be extreme because otherwise, people are going to find a way around the law. People will continue to work themselves, but it's really not just themselves are going to be working, but they're going to be working their servants, and they're going to be working their animals continuously. And the promised land would become just as much a land of toil and sweat and futility as the land they had just left out of slavery. No, God had to deal with it. God could not tolerate a high-handed disregard of his commandments that were designed to bless everyone in that society. Everyone. And so, when we think about this story, I mean, how do we apply it to our lives? Because, I mean, on the one hand, we are not in the Old Covenant. The Sabbath no longer applies to us in the way it applied to the nation of Israel. So in some ways, this story just isn't relevant to us at all. And yet, as usual, it is very relevant for us. Because a story like this, it always gets me questioning why God has to show judgment. Because, I mean, couldn't he have just forgiven this guy? Couldn't he just let him come in, stay in the community of God's people and come into the promised land? Couldn't he have just shown forgiveness? Why did he have to show judgment? It's the exact same question that I ask about my non-Christian friends. I don't know about you, but I find the idea that not everybody going to heaven, that not everyone's going to be going to heaven, that makes me sad. That makes me sad. And I mean, I'd like to be wrong. I'd like to believe that all of my friends and my family will be coming to the new heavens and the new earth when God establishes his kingdom here on earth. Why would God forbid anybody from entering that paradise? Why would God forbid anybody from enjoying the paradise of dwelling in his presence forever? Can't we all just go to heaven? This story reveals to us the reason why God cannot just forgive everybody. If God just forgave this man, let him remain in the community and be brought into the promised land, even though his heart is set on disregarding the commandments of God, he's going to turn this promised land back into a land that's just like the one they left. It'll become like Egypt again. Likewise, if God were to just let everybody come into heaven or to the new earth, even though people disregard and actively hate his commandments, the new heavens and the new earth will become just like the old heavens and the old earth, where we are right now. See, what is the goal of the Christian life? What is the goal of the Christian life? I believe it is to live in right relationship with God, with Him as God and we as His creatures. Everything we do as Christians, every sacrifice we make as Christians, every choice we make to die to ourselves and to deny our desires, is because we want to live into that goal. We want to live into that goal. For us, paradise is having Jesus as our Lord. That is paradise. And living that way forever. However, everything, it gets messed up when we think that we should be God. When we, with a high hand, reject God as God and choose to become gods ourselves. Everything gets messed up. Not submitting our desires to an external standard, not denying our passions and dying to ourselves. That's what's made the world the way it is right now. It's antithetical to what we want as Christians. So then when I think about paradise, that's our promised land. You know, this promised land will only be called a paradise if people share that same goal. If they share that same passion and the same desire. If people think it is more preferable to live under the lordship of Jesus Christ than to live under our own lordship. For those who think that they should be the Lord of their own lives, paradise won't be paradise to them. It won't be. If God let everybody into heaven, for some it would be a paradise, for others it most certainly would not be a paradise. And if the new heavens and the new earth are inhabited again by this dueling perspective of whether we see Jesus as Lord or whether we see ourselves as Lord, then it's going to be just like the old heavens and the old earth. God could not bring this man in Numbers 15 into the promised land. He couldn't have him remain in the community. No, God had to exercise judgment because without judgment, there will be no salvation. What this story shows us here is both the importance and the danger of our wills. What do you truly desire? The man picking up sticks here, he showed the orientation of his heart. His choice to disregard the Sabbath was a symptom of a greater issue going on inside of his heart. His refusal to have God be his master. And that's a struggle that each and every one of us face every single day. Every single day. The same desire that tempted this man unto judgment is the same desire we seek to fight against as we seek to live this Christian life. I mean, have you ever felt the pull to live your own way? To live according to your own desires? I mean, I'm not a prophet, but I'm going to say yes. I mean, literally, that's like every single Disney movie you'll ever watch, right? Be the most authentic version of yourself and don't let anyone tell you anything otherwise. That philosophy doesn't work out. And it's opposed to the message of the cross that we seek to live in our lives, of denying ourselves, taking up our cross daily, and dying. But the battle of lordship, the battle of who gets to determine what I do in my life, it's rarely ever played out in a dramatic way. No, generally that battle of lordship over my life, it is waged over the simple things in my life. Like choosing to pick up sticks on the Sabbath day instead of resting. It's in the simple things, the simple choices where God tells me to do something and I just don't want to do it. You know, I say I want to know God's commandments and his rules over my life, but I don't read the Bible with any consistency. There's a problem there. I know God tells me that I'm supposed to forgive that person who I really don't want to forgive and is not asking for forgiveness, and I just don't want to forgive. I know God tells me I'm supposed to forgive, but I don't want to do it, and so I won't do it. I know God tells me that I'm supposed to exercise self-control and moderation, right? But you know what? I just don't want to do it, so I won't. The temptation to sin with a high hand, it constantly bombards us in the daily decisions of our lives, in the simple decisions of our lives. I need to wake up every single day and die to myself. And most days, I just don't feel like I want to do it. And yet, we have chosen to be Christians. No one is forcing this label upon us, or at least nobody should be forcing this label upon us, because it's not necessarily the easiest life, because the road is tough. Jesus himself says the road is narrow and the way is difficult. Because I want to be my own God more frequently than I'd want to admit. The temptation to sin with a high hand is a choice that will confront me every single day in the simple decisions of life. The Christian life isn't a life of ease, it's a life of war. And yet, paradoxically, at the exact same time, the Christian life is a life of rest. It's a life of rest. The tragedy of this man picking up sticks on the Sabbath lies in the fact that he could have been resting. He could have been resting. He could have rested in God. He could have chosen to cease from his toil and labor and trust in a God who provides, a God who promises to be with him forever. Well, we might not have the Sabbath day necessarily in the new covenant because that Sabbath day has been transformed for us into this eternal rest of the believer's soul. Every day, we have the privilege of resting in the sovereign lordship of God and to cease not from physical work, but to cease from the toil and the labor and the futility that results from sin. God in the Sabbath was always after the Israelites to stop making this world cursed. God was always after the Israelites to stop thinking of themselves as gods, to stop listening to their own lordship of their lives, as if they were the masters of their own fate. No, God must guide and direct their lives. God was always after them submitting their desires to his authority, because only in that can there be actual rest from the curse and sin of this world. And that rationale is deeply applicable to us today. In fact, it's only in surrendering our lordship for the lordship of Jesus Christ, it is only in the daily battle of dying to ourselves and refusing to sin with a high hand that we find true peace and rest in this life. The Christian life is one of it's a paradox of choosing to die and yet living, of surrendering control of our lives to another and finding in that our true humanity, living according to our true potential as a species. But to achieve that, we need to meditate on stories like this in Numbers 15. Because although it seems like it's the least of all the sins committed in the book of Numbers, it reveals the heart behind all sin. By God's grace, may we choose to love rest rather than to choose our own way in a high-handed disregard of God. Amen.
Let's stand together to sing again.
Journey of the narrow road, and those who've gone before us line the way, cheering on the faithful, encouraging the weary, life a stirring testament to God's sustaining grace, surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses. Let us run the race not only for the prize, but as those who've gone before us, let us lead to those behind us, the heritage of faithfulness passed on through godly lives. May the fire of our devotion light their way. Footprints that we lead them to believe, and the lives we live inspire them to obey. Oh, may all who come behind us find us faithful. After all our hopes and dreams have come and gone, and our children sift through all we've left behind, may the clues that they discover and the memories they uncover become the light that leads them to the road we each must find. Oh, may all who come behind us find us faithful. May the fire of our devotion light their way. Footprints that we lead them to believe, and the lives we live inspire them to obey. Oh, may all who come behind us find us faithful. Oh, may all who come behind us find us faithful.
Benediction comes from the book of Psalms, chapter 16. Preserve me, O God, for in you I take refuge. I say to Yahweh, you are my master. I have no good apart from you. Yahweh is my chosen portion and my cup. You hold my lot. The lines have fallen for me in pleasant places. Indeed, I have a beautiful inheritance. Amen.